challenge Njål at the beginning, because during or after Metin's presentation, there was a question about interim measures from the Court of Human Rights and the weak response from the court. What is this? I'm not sure whether everybody knows what kind of tool this is in the hand of the court. Interim measure, what is that and what can it do?
It's easy to say what it is and what it can do. But the idea is that since it will take some time in the court for deliberations and to get documents and to look into the case and to decide in the case, sometimes the court will be in a situation where it needs to have a relief that the situation it has been presented, that has been presented to it is not being changed. So, for example, if you are to be expelled from one country to another where you will be facing maybe death penalty or torture, then the court will say you just have to wait until you have decided before you do something with this person to expel this person. It's not always that respected, and the court is a little bit afraid of doing it, because if it pushes it too much, then the states will say that, okay, we can't be waiting for this court to make its decision for such a long time. We have to act now. And being a court with 47 different member states, and some are very human rights friendly and some are not, then it's also sometimes difficult for the court to find the right balance between how far really does our powers go. So in the situation of Turkey, it's a typical example. How far does is the court willing to push the situation in Turkey and say that this is something that now you have to listen to us, when it maybe has not been pushing Russia all that far, or will be pushing Poland, for example, all that far. So this is something in between law and politics, and yeah.
Now I open the floor for you. Is there anything you want to ask? Mainly questions, not comments, please. Everything is so clear. I mean, Beate, open.
So,
yes, Metin?
Between law and politics, to whom European Court of Human Rights? You finalized your words. This is a little bit, you told that a little bit, huh?
Between law and politics.
Law and politics. But we are talking about the European Court of Human Rights, not a politician atmosphere.
Yes, I agree with you. This it should not be kind of the wording from a lawyer, a human rights lawyer. But I think that
I'm not a lawyer.
But still, it's that's kind of reality. Like, how far is the court able to ask for states?
This is the tragedy of the reality.
Yeah. So this is kind of like how, if the court is pushing too far, then suddenly the European states will say that no, we're not so very much interested in what you're doing anymore. We don't want to listen to you. We don't want to give you resources. We don't want to pay for the fancy building you have in Strasbourg, the salaries you're upholding, etc. So the court always will have to find its balance between what is written in the books and what they read in reality, and they have some margin of appreciation, the court too, to look into how far should we be pushing the countries. And using Turkey as an example, you've seen this in the cases on freedom of religion or belief. How willing has the court been on pushing the Turkish authorities, saying that you now have to listen to us when it comes to freedom of religion or belief, and how much has the court over time been accepting of the limitations on freedom of religion or belief in Turkey. So I think it's like when you read it in books and when you read the law, the answer is not always the same as when you look into the reality.
And then you have the other, maybe the most influential actor when it comes to Turkey, the EU. and there seems to be a new drive in EU-Turkey relations at the same time as we have what we could call a human rights crisis in Turkey. And then the question is, I mean, Beate said something about the consequences of this deal in terms of handling refugees, the gatekeeper of Europe. But Metin, do you see any other consequences of more EU involvement, new negotiations starting? Could that help? Yeah, I'm trying to find some more optimistic avenues at the end of the seminar.
I'm so sorry, I'm not an expert on EU relations really, but I have to say that the first agreement between Ankara and the trade union in that time, in 1963. I'm 60 years old, so all my life, approximately, is a little bit at the same time our history with the European. And there are some informal kind of reports, Ostlander reports, for example, which was prepared in 2005, something like that. The final paragraphs was very interesting. The final paragraph is something like that. European Union should decide its strategy and geographical borders before Turkey will be a member of the European Union, something like that. So from both sides, Turkey's side and European Union side, first of all, such a relations, unfortunately, might be easily used as a apparat, something from both sides, not only the one side, both sides. This is first problem, I think. In that case also there is no real willingness from both sides. Secondly, within European Union, as you know, I'm not an expert, there are many discussions. What is the meaning of European Union? Is there a unique European Union perspective, for example? This is another one.
Yeah.
So, so sorry, but I'm not an expert on these issues.
John, among the human rights activists I know, you are one of the most principled. And it's, of course, a resource for a country like Turkey to have guidelines, to have even court judgments. I mean, if there was a will, there is a lot the authorities could use. But do you see any use of guidelines, international input in Turkey when it comes to freedom of religion or belief?
Do you want the long answer or the short answer?
We have to have the short one now.
Okay, there are two words in English which are quite short, yes and no, and I picked the one that's spelled shorter, no. When one says Turkey, then there can always be a risk of identifying a country with its political leadership. And in Turkey, there are many voices. Some are rather friendly towards human rights, even, we can say, at personal risk of their life, as we have heard. Others are somewhat hostile. I would say, in terms of our relationships with Turkey, we need always to think what will be the impact of our decisions from outside of Turkey on those who are friendly towards human rights within Turkey. You talked about principled. I would say you find out whether somebody really is principled in defense of human rights when their life is on the line. And in Turkey, there are many examples of people who put their life on the line for human rights. And so in relation to our actions from outside of Turkey, in relation to the guidelines, which are international, they don't just apply to Turkey, we must think how we can engage with, how we can support those within Turkey who raise their voices, who take actions in support of human rights, of all human rights, including freedom of religious belief, for all people.
A short question there.
Yes, I have a question to make it. I agree totally with what John said now, but I have spoken so many times in different occasions with Turkish NGOs, Turkish freedom of expression organizations, and I think personally that one really problem are that they are very, very seldom they work together. All these organizations works inside their own group.
Mm-hmm.
They don't support each other in a necessary way, and sometimes they're even hostile to each other. And this is a problem. How can we make all these organizations work better together and support each other in a better way?
Metin, you have 20 seconds to say something about this.
You're right. At least till now we couldn't succeed. At least. But it does not mean that we will not succeed. But only one example. For example, Human Rights Foundation of Turkey, our main mission is to treat and rehabilitate torture survivors and other survivors who faced serious human rights violations. So this is the main, we founded in 1990, but before 1991, in the daily life, the people tried to reach the torture survivors, particularly after the military coup in 9. So the mission's important. Otherwise, it can be more complicated. But we will succeed.
You will succeed.
Can you permit me to have a sex change and become Mina briefly?
Yeah, very shortly.
Okay. With medical technology, you can change really fast these days. Mina's experience, from what she's said to me, is actually, in relation to freedom of religion or belief, then she's experiencing an increasingly good cooperation with other human rights organizations, including Amnesty Turkey, that kind of thing. So I would say, yeah, okay. As in all areas of life in many countries, you find sometimes a lack of cooperation. But I would say in Turkey, in relation to human rights defenders, it's certainly not all bad. There are signs of good cooperation also.
Beate, you will have the final word among the panelists.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay. I have to be conscious then. No, I actually would like to try to end with a kind of optimistic view. Despite the current situation in Turkey and the direction of the development these days, which are not very optimistic, one should say. Turkey made two conditions to agree upon an agreement with the EU to hinder refugees from leaving Turkey and travel on to Europe, in addition to the money. And that was to revive the accession negotiations between Turkey and the EU, and it was to make an end to the obligation of having a visa for Turkish citizens to travel to Europe. The last one is a very, very important point for Turkey. But let's go back to the revival of the accession negotiations. This is a kind of twofold thing. Because on the one hand, for any country who wants to have, let's say, an A or a B status cooperation with the EU, there are certain conditions. Some of the conditions include a respect for fundamental human rights, which means that as part of the revival of the negotiations for accession, to use the discussion on the current situation in Turkey and respect for human rights gives us a new possibility to try to see if it's possible to have the development going in the right direction. But that implies, as a condition from the European side, that they had to make the negotiations with Turkey serious. They had to be credible when they make their conditions and demands on Turkey. They had to be credible in the sense that, yes, at the end of the day, the plan is actually to welcome Turkey as a member of the EU. Because now they are speaking with two tongues, and they've done so for many years. Yes, they pretend to have serious negotiations with Turkey. And on the one hand, everyone knows that you have very skeptic country actors in the EU who don't have any plan whatsoever to welcome Turkey as a full member of the EU. So one, the EU has to be serious themselves. If they now revive the accession negotiations with Turkey, it has to be done properly in a serious manner. They had to be credible both by making conditions for the membership, but also to make it credible that yes, we actually do have a plan to welcome you as a member of the EU. Otherwise, the conditions they will make on human rights are worth nothing. Because Turkey has been sick and tired by the double game that the EU has played with them for too many years. So, positively, hopefully, the revival of the accession negotiations, if the EU really wants to, they can use it as a tool to try to improve the human rights situation in Turkey. But then they have to be credible and serious that they will want to welcome Turkey in the EU. And secondly, the Erdogan era is not eternal. It will all naturally has to come to an end. But then at the other end, and as Avşen made a kind of reference to, one of the challenges in Turkey is that you don't have a very solid and well-functioning opposition among the political parties. Yes, they are there, but yes, they do not cooperate properly. Many don't find them credible enough to dare to vote for them. So the opposition in Turkey themselves has to become, credible, professional, reliable, and to become a real alternative to AKP, if that's what they want to be. They have to be responsible themselves as well. And hopefully, as I say, the Erdogan era will not be eternal. It will have to come to an end. And make sure then that the Turks themselves have a good alternative to come in place. Thank you.
Okay.
So I'm still optimistic actually.
After all.
After all.
Perhaps we should start to make some politics instead of just have a power game. The political, that's a good start, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, I thank you all, the speakers and panelists, and thank you all of you who came and took part in this seminar. I hope you are a little bit wiser and not totally pessimistic. Thank you very much.